So what is an obelisk? A lot of people wonder, they've seen them in, civilized society, but there is an occult meaning to some of these obelisks, and especially the people that worship them. I believe that knowing that obelisks and ley lines working together as a power grid is a strong foothold in the understanding of how ancient pagan religions operated and still operate today through the Luciferian stronghold. And this stronghold is trying to separate us from God. These monuments are still being erected today, and we can use the construction and dedication to such pagan monuments as a proven timeline that these events have taken place and are still being carried through to current times. In ancient days, through these obelisks, ancient demonic gods were being worshipped. The question is it possible that ancient demonic gods are being worshipped today through these obelisks? There are several cities that have obelisks around the world. The city of London, for example, District of Columbia, the Vatican. There's an article, or there's a blog, and the blog is called Malum in Se. Malum in Se. And this blog is essentially exposing these obelisks around the world and the history of these obelisks. The author of this article says, the word obelisk is defined as Baal's shaft. Baal, he's a demon in the Old Testament, who we rebuke, reject, and renounce in Jesus' name. Go to the foot of the cross that he may do with you as he wills. So the word obelisk is defined as Baal's shaft and is phallic in design. Baal worship was the beginning of all paganism. Obelisks are used for sundials and for the tallying of the winter and summer solstice. The spirit of the sun god was supposed to enter the stones at certain periods, and on these occasions, human sacrifices were offered, much like the Aztecs, by the way. There's a book, it's called Our Phallic Heritage by Charles Berger. And in that book, the author states, quote, all pillars or columns originally had a phallic significance and were therefore considered sacred. Pan, the goat god, who we reject, rebuke, and renounce in Jesus' name, go to the foot of the cross. Pan, the goat god, was the god of sensuality. He was often represented as an obelisk. You also have the Roman author Pliny. He wrote about this city of On, where kings entered into a kind of rivalry in forming elongated blocks of stone known as obelisks, and consecrated them to the divinity of the sun. An obelisk, it looks like a long shaft, a long tower. And again, we have obelisks all over the world. This is the pagan architecture, which according to many historians, it's supposed to be the shaft of the demon god Baal. These are all over the world. But you can also see that there's the power of Freemasonry that's involved in all this as well. The power of Freemasonry is all too evident when we see that they have erected obelisks in London, towering over the White House and the Washington Monument, erected in honor of George Washington, who may have been a man of goodwill, but he was a Freemason. And the Freemasons, this occult organization known as Freemasonry, it tightly grips control and reigns supreme over the government of the United States and our highest courts. In other words, it's been infiltrated at the highest levels by high-ranking Freemasons. In this article that I have here, you can go to virginmostpowerful.org or my website, jesseromero.com, and you can click on this article that I'm referencing. The article is called Exposing Evil in a Civilized Society, the Occult Meaning of Obelisks and the People Who Worship Them. And it's a blog written by Malum and Say. That's a pseudonym of the author. They have a chart here that shows the structure of Freemasonry. And you'll see in this chart put out by the Freemasons showing the structure of Freemasonry, you'll see all the pagan symbolism in this chart, and you'll see that the Freemasons are big on using obelisks. Even the White House is drenched in pagan symbolism. Many of our presidents were Freemasons. They may have been men of goodwill, and they may have not been steeped in Freemasonry, but nonetheless, many of them were Freemasons. They maybe just did it as being part of a good old boys club, but nonetheless, they were still part of Freemasonry. So you'll see a lot of Freemasonic symbolism even in Washington, D.C. There's not one Christian symbol to be found in Washington, D.C., so far as I know. Obelisks are usually placed in front of fountains or pools, so the reflection imitates the occult saying of, as above, so below. In other words, what happens on the level of reality also happens on another level, the spiritual realm. And that's essentially what an obelisk is trying to indicate. What happens below, what happens above happens below. As above, so below. So what's interesting is the placement of these megalithic monuments as obelisks and other great things such as the pyramids, Stonehenge, Solomon's Temple, even Tesla's labs. They're all on intersecting ley lines, so it's no surprise that all three of the globalist trinity of control obelisks here on planet Earth are placed on important sectors of our Earth's energy grid. By the way, it's documented that Alexander the Great was guided by Aristotle to take control back of these major intersections from evil forces. There's also a map on this website that shows the ley line grid, and it shows you the way all the obelisks in the world are connected. In October of 2018, a temporary monument called the Arch of Baal, demon god who we reject, rebuke, and renounce in Jesus' name, was placed in Washington, D.C. This seems questionable to me, as Baal was the god of child sacrifice. So why, of all things and places, was this structure placed there in Washington, D.C.? Who is still paying homage to such a deity? We're being initiated without our knowledge and forced to carry out ritualistic behavior in the form of politics and holiday customs. Since this demon monument to this demon god Baal, who we reject, rebuke, and renounce in Jesus' name, this Arch of Baal was placed in Washington, D.C. And guess what? What's interesting, right now we have the most pro-abortion president that we've had in the history of our country. You can see a picture of the Arch of Baal right in front of the White House. The article says we've entered a more modern era in the timeline of man, and a huge statue of Baal, who we reject, rebuke, and renounce in Jesus' name, may not be offered children along with loud drums to drown out the screams, but I believe these enemies are carrying out sacrifices in a different form. I was horrified to learn that some of our products, including food, have flavors or scents made from fetuses. There is obviously Planned Parenthood dynamic of aborted babies and the actualized rituals that can go along with these through the right legal papers. Abortion rights activists known as the Satanic Temple announced in December 2020 they've posted billboards in Texas and Florida to promote what they call their religious abortion ritual. You can see the billboard on this website. It says, there's a picture of a demon god. I won't describe it. And it says, the billboard says, put up by the Temple of Satan. It says, the Satanic Temple just announced the religious abortion ritual, which is designed to protect access to the medical procedures using existing religious liberty. You'll also find the ancient Babylonian Egyptian gods that are being worshipped to this day required sacrifice on certain days. Would this have changed? Did a demonic entity have a change of heart? So it would actually be more offshoot if a big change in an ancient religion happened than to shrug off the possibility that sacrifices still happen. In fact, the author says, as I've stated above about alternatives to sacrificing, another outlet could come in the form of false flags. Sacrifice is often a burnt offering. Is it a coincidence that both Waco and Oklahoma bombings happened on the very same day, which happens to fall on an occultic holiday that requires a burnt sacrifice? The author writes, I've gone over a religious and cultural aspect of obelisks. Now for another viewpoint on such things. Brian Forster, an author holding a degree in science who dedicates so much of his time learning about and traveling to ancient structures, states that obelisks aren't just statues to be written on or to glorify a pharaoh or a ruler, but was in fact designed to be tuned in to a certain frequency because it was part of an ancient system of energy transmission. Possibly pyramids were the energy generators based on the water traveling in tunnels beneath the structure, causing the pyramid itself to resonate. Then you see that there's a picture of a water tunnel found underneath a pyramid. It's this is extremely interesting. And let me go into another article now about the obelisk, written from a Catholic perspective, St. Peter's Basilica Info. The obelisk from Egypt was brought to Rome by Emperor Caligula in 37 AD. It originally stood in his circus on a spot to the south of the basilica, close to the present sacristy. Pope Sixtus V had Domenico move it in 1586 to the center of St. Peter's Square. It's also a sundial. Its shadows mark noon over the signs of the zodiac, in which marble discs in the paving of the square. The obelisk rests upon 4 couchant lions, each with 2 bodies whose tails intertwine. Obelisk comes from the word which means in the shape of a spear. For pagans, the obelisk was a solar symbol that represented a vital flow between heaven and earth, a way of communicating to the divine. As a pagan monument in the Christian square, it's a symbol of humanity reaching out to Christ, because everybody ultimately doesn't realize that that's what they're looking for is truth. You're listening to the Terry and Jesse Show. I'm talking about the history of obelisks and sharing where they come from and for what purpose are they used. You're listening to the Terry and Jesse Show. We'll keep talking about obelisks, and I'll show you why they've been decommissioned, the ones over in Rome. We'll be right back.